Hello and welcome to the Wednesday night Grumpy Sound Guy show. Tonight we're going to talk about sub frequency. We're going to talk about mixing subs correctly. We're going to talk about a lot of mistakes that I see guys making when it comes to mixing their subs and bringing, in some cases, too much low end to the table in the mix, and in other cases, not enough low end into the mix. So yeah, that's going to kind of be today's topic. We're going to really get into all things low frequency and the different ways systems are set up, stereo versus aux-fed sub, all the jazz. So stick around. You don't want to miss a second of today's show. Hey there, could you please subscribe to the channel? I mean, we are getting better with this. More of you are subscribing. I think we're up to like 79% of you are not subscribed. That was better than the 93% that we had about 6 weeks ago. So the channel is growing. Good things are happening in the world of the Grumpy Sound Guy and our content. But, it costs absolutely nothing to subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell so you can see whenever I post new videos. And by all means, if you really enjoy this content and this is something that really speaks to you and something you like to share with your bandmates or your other production buddies or anybody that's in the music business, join the channel. Become a paid financial supporter of the channel. Monthly subscriptions start at about the cost of a cup of coffee. I think it's $5, $4.99, something like that. A month, guys, a month. You're going to blow more than that on mic clips this month. You're going to blow more than that on replacing the XLR cables that are going to take a dump on you this month. $5, dude, that's the entry level thing. I think the upper echelon, there's 3 different packages, is only like $10. So, I mean, dude, get in here. That way we can get, specific stuff to you, answer your questions specifically. I am, starting, we're in the infant stages of all this. It's only about 2 weeks out now since we started this. So I am funneling more and more content to the member-only side. We just did a full festival tour of my festival rig, at the Fells Point Oyster Fest this past weekend. People have been begging me to do a run through of the system. That is a great video for members only. And we had a guy from Ireland reach out to us and want our opinion on the best active boxes he could be hanging in his club or in his pub in Ireland. So we just did a members only video that posted today, Tuesday, about that specific thing. When you are a member, I give you a lot more personal interaction. I'll even shoot you over to my Facebook page and we can have one-on-one interaction there in Messenger on Facebook and all that kind of stuff. But I am reserving, because the channel and the content is growing so much, I am reserving all those privileges to those that are part of the YouTube membership program. Again, it costs the same as a cup of Starbucks coffee, dude, So, I mean, I can't make it any more affordable than that. If you go to clpaudio.com, there's tons of merch there. There's also, we're getting to re-release all of our promotional packages there as well for the bigger clients that are looking for more face-to-face, hands-on, kind of services as well. So stay tuned for all that as it develops in the next couple weeks. And, man, come on. Get on the train, dude. What are you waiting on? You're already watching the channel. You might as well become part of the inner circle and get in here at the family. I can give you a little noogie on the head, that kind of stuff. Come on, I hope to see you soon. Okay, so, sub. When I guess I'll give you a little bit of background about my world and where I come from as far as sub frequency is concerned, because I think everybody has some kind of story Sub-frequency is the sought after, element in what we do that I think a lot of guys put huge amounts of validation on your credibility as a sound engineer as to how you can mix sub or having a system that can reproduce sub correctly and all that kind of stuff. In my story, it starts out when I was about 16 years old doing car audio. I was a complete bass junkie, sub junkie. My younger brother actually still does DB drags. He lives in South Carolina, does DB drags, and builds all his own transmission enclosures and, has a little side hustle thing where he does car audio. All that kind of came from our love of just really good high fidelity, audio in our lives. As I grew as a musician and got involved in more and more pro audio stuff in a live music setting, I always wanted my mixes to feel that low end impact that I used to feel when I was in my car. Now, that wasn't exactly where I needed to be. So I don't bring that to the table saying that's where we should be reaching for. I'm bringing that to the table just to communicate to you my story. Because what I found out years later was that approach was not correct in reinforcing live music in its natural organic state. By that, I mean when you go to listen to a band play without a sound system, let's just say it's an all instrumental thing, you don't have low end like knocking you over, okay? That's not what music sounds like in its natural state. Being in sound reinforcement, not recreation, reinforcement, our job is to take what the band is giving us, correct the sound for the venue that we're in, the room that we're in. If we're outside, well, then we don't have a whole lot of that to deal with because we're just in an open air, whole space, kind of scenario and framework. But it's not our job to turn it into some kind of freak of nature. You know what I'm saying? And who I see making these mistakes most were guys like me. Were guys that came from bass addict, addiction, kind of mentality from car audio, or maybe you were a club DJ where bottom end, like if you're doing electronic dance music, man, bottom end is half the battle. Look, I call it as it is here in, Grumpy Sound Guy world. If you're doing electronic dance music and things of that nature, it requires an enormous amount of low-end reproduction because that's part of that genre of music. But if you're mixing your local cover band, that is not the case, and I see a lot of cats that came from kind of my background, from car audio or from that DJ standpoint, and then they graduate over into, live music, audio. They still feel like they have to have this huge 140 dB low end in order to be validated as a sound engineer. I honestly cannot even count and tell you the amount of sound guys that I know in the business who strictly validate who they are or who anybody else is by how well they can manage low end. Now, there is some validity to that conversation because reproducing low end efficiently is not for the faint of heart. Now, a lot of these active boxes that are out now has made it sort of kind of idiot proof. But if you're gonna produce real bottom end, real, wall shaking bottom end, the bottom end that kicks you in your chest and makes you feel like somebody just punched you in the chest or something, that takes knowledge and experience. It takes knowledge of understanding your system. It takes experience of knowing what a room can handle and what a room can't. You can only move so much air in any given room. Then it starts creating resistance against the subdrivers that is giving you negative results. It's counterproductive. So experience steps in at that point and tells us when we've hit that level and when to back off and when to not be trying to give the room more than it can handle. it's a deep subject, man, and it can be a hot button subject for a lot of guys, because so many guys have spent literally thousands upon thousands upon thousands of dollars trying to get that perfect kick drum sound or that perfect low-end resonant out of their left hand of the keyboard or the bass guitar or whatever, when really what you want to shoot for is a full spectrum of reproduction in an intelligent and fidelity-based manner. Now, this whole subject kind of came to my table when somebody tagged me in a video of somebody, a pro touring guy, talking about how to better manage sub-frequency on a pro touring level in arenas. You know, arenas are indoor venues that are gigantic. They typically can range from, 10, 12,000 people up to maybe 20, 25,000 people. It just really depends on how big the arena is. And in that environment, those pro touring guys have an enormous amount of muscle, an enormous amount of efficiency in those high-end rigs to produce as much low end as anybody could ever possibly handle. To the point that it can probably make you poop your pants, if you walk in front of it or something. But, what they were asking this engineer was, how do you manage low end in that environment with all that muscle on tap and keep low end musical? And his answer was so simplistic, and it's something that I have been saying for years and years and years. He said, turn it down. Let that sink in for a minute. For all the buzzers and whistles that we bring to the table on this channel, for all the mixed tricks that I try to communicate to you guys, for all of the black magic, hocus pocus, audio voodoo that we try to sprinkle pixie dust on and everything else, at the end of the day, the quickest, most efficient way to get more fidelity out of your system, not just low end, but out of your entire system, is to turn it down. I know a bunch of guys, a bunch of upper middle market guys. These are guys that are floating in and out of that B National circuit in their area. They're doing a lot of outdoor festivals. They're doing a lot of that. You know what I'm saying? Like, they're like this far from pro touring. They got 2 warehouses full of gear and 8 or 10 guys working for them. I've seen those cats overdrive systems in so many different scenarios that it just made the system harsh instead of warm and approachable and comfortable. You have that whole Munson-Fletcher, theory, which says that when you increase and decrease volume, it changes the reproduction of frequency in your system. Google that, because that's a whole nother video that I'm not going to get into today. But the more you push a system, especially when you get to the upper echelons of what that system can handle in terms of sound pressure, then you start losing some fidelity. And a great way to regain that is to just turn it down. Turn it down some, man. I find myself doing that all the time. This past weekend at the festival we were at, we were basically just shooting a courtyard just a little bit bigger than like an NBA basketball court. It wasn't super huge, but it wasn't tiny. We were outside, open air, whole space kind of, framework. And there were several times where I felt like I needed to turn my tops. I have an aux-fed system. We're going to talk about that here in a minute. So my subs run independently from my tops. And there was a couple times where I had my subs at Unity and I had the tops like down to -4, almost -5 dBU, because I just felt like it was cleaning up the mix a little more and it was making it less harsh. It wasn't hurting my ears. You know what I mean? That's when you know you have your system EQ'd right and you have it set in cruise control. And then the system will operate a whole lot cooler. It won't put out as much thermal heat and stuff like that. The trick to being a really good sound engineer, not a sound guy, a sound engineer, is understanding the parameters of all that kind of stuff and finding that sweet spot for your system. When you find that sweet spot for your system, then you can cruise control in that sweet spot for 10, 12 hours and never have a system failure, never have an issue. Everything will run exactly the way it was designed to run. And your mix will sound huge and defined and really clean and fat on the bottom. And you got everything just where it needs to be. Sub is the same way. It's real easy to push too much sub. It just is, you know? And I see a whole bunch of guys doing it. I can think of a local band right now who has spent literally thousands upon thousands of dollars on trying to get the perfect kick drum sound. They're right now on their probably fifth or sixth set of subs and power configuration and that sort of thing. Yeah. And, you know, the kick is here and the rest of the mix is here, which in some environments, that's okay. You know, if you're playing 4 on the floor dance music, the kick probably should be a little bit more elevated. But with this guy, it's a lot of times way crazy elevated. Look, I'm a drummer, so, I mean, I love a nice fat kick as much as the next guy. You're getting no argument from me about that. If you talk to the clients that work with me and perform on my systems regularly, they will tell you JR's got a fat, warm, crystal clear system. That's the way we run things at COP Audio and Staging. But the reality of that is I never want to be so focused on having the best sub response in the area that I forget that I'm trying to mix dynamic, organic, living, breathing music that should move around. You know what I mean? In the mix. It should get quiet. It should get loud and everything in between. And if you got things compressed so hard or you got things gated so hard at the drums and things like that, you rob it of that ability, then you have failed as a sound engineer. Now you're just a sound guy. I call them noise guys. Noise engineers, I think is what I called them back earlier this year when we were talking about this, you know, from that perspective. Sub needs to be a very defined part of your mix, but it also needs to be put in context of the program itself. You know, I mix bottom end differently for a rock band than what I do for a dance band, than what I do for a country band, than what I do for a bluegrass band who doesn't even have a drum set on stage. Basically, your low end is a stand-up bass. That's about it. That's about what you got coming through your subs at a bluegrass show. But it needs to be present, but without overriding everything else in the mix. You know, the worst thing in the world is to go to a show and then all you hear out of the low end is just like there's no definition. You know, bass players playing, it's all no definition. Nothing. And you're sitting there like, this is not musical. This is not enjoyable. I would really like to hear the notes that the bass player's playing. You know, now sometimes you're just kind of at the mercy of the venue. So if you're in a corner, low end resonates in corners, by the way, if you didn't know that. If you want to go see a band, set in the middle of the room as close to the sound guy as you can get, and that will be the best sounding place in the room. Hands down. When I buy tickets to go see my favorite bands, I always buy tickets next to the sound booth. Sometimes I know the guy's working, so I mean, there's that. Other times, I just want to be right where the sweet spot is, you know? Because I went and seen Blink-182 last year with my daughter. Wonderful concert. Amazing time. My daughter and I had an amazing time. I love the band. Travis Barker was so completely out of control, man. I can't even tell you how much fun we had. But we were in a big arena, and we were kind of on the corner. Our seats were kind of in a corner, rounded corner, and then the stage was, you know, kind of to our right and in front of us. And because we were sort of kind of in that corner, the low end was resonating like crazy. It wasn't any fault of the front of house engineer. It's just kind of what you get. You're at the mercy of the venue. You know, I heard somebody say not long ago that, you know, band's only going to sound as good as the venue will allow it to sound. Well, it's our job as sound engineers to try and work those bugs out of the room with house EQing and our gain structure and how we approach the room acoustically in order to get those things where they need to be. Now, the two big ways that we run sound systems is just stereo left, right, or we do stereo left, right tops and aux sub bottoms. Most guys these days are running aux sub bottoms, mainly because it gives you a lot more independence with the sub. You can choose what you put in the sub. Like I obviously put kick drum, bass guitar. I'll put some keyboard in there because the left hand of the keyboard needs to be present when, especially when they're doing like synthesizer stuff or whatever. It really adds a lot of body, to that. And that's it, no vocals, no guitar. Everything else is like high passed up to, 100 or 150 hertz anyways, so you get to pick and choose. And that gives you the ability to kind of open up a little bit of that low mid in the tops that you normally wouldn't in stereo mode because it'd be seeping into the subs. So it gives you a little bit more flexibility with that. And you have independent volume control over the sub overall. If you want more sub in the system but don't want to get, turn the mid-high, which is where all the painful frequencies are. If you don't want to turn that up, you can just turn the sub up and leave this alone. That's an advantage of it. I prefer aux-fed sub. I can mix either way. I spent 5 years in a venue up until COVID where we were stereo, and I mixed a stereo mix 150 shows a year for 5 years in that room. Never had any problems. Always was able to put everything where I wanted it to be. Had a great reputation for good mixes in that room. And, when I left there to come back into the CLP audio world full time, my reputation kind of just transferred right over into what my independent stuff was going to be. And then all my systems are aux-fed, sub. Now, there are two different approaches to mixing. There's things that when I'm mixing on a stereo rig that I will do that I may not do when I'm on an aux-fed rig, and vice versa. Pick your poison. There is no right or wrong answer there. It's whatever you prefer. I know in today's, and I was a late bloomer to aux-fed sub, by the way. Let me just put that out there, okay? Because I have never had an issue on a stereo rig that I couldn't get everything out of it that I wanted to get out of it that anybody on an aux-fed rig could do. And for a long time, I just have my head wrapped around the fact that I'm not saying it's better or worse or it's right or wrong. I'm just saying what I'm doing is working. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I'm kind of one of those guys, with a lot of different things within my business here inside the pro audio world. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I was just having a light and witty conversation with one of my crew members last weekend about parallel compression on drums, and we were both, he's about, 2 years out of college now. He's been working with me about 3 years. He started with us as an intern from college, and he's really growing by leaps and bounds, and I love the guy. But I'm like, are you parallel compressing yet? And he's like, no, not really. He said, because it's just one more thing I got to manage. I really don't need it. No one ever complains about it. And I'm like, that's the exact reason why I don't do it. I'm not saying there's not benefits to it. I know there is, but it's like, it ain't broke. So why am I trying to fix it? Why am I trying to put more icing on a cake that's already got so much icing that everybody's getting sugar diabetes? You know what I mean? Like, you can roast me for it. I don't care. I'm not even going to say that you're wrong, Probably should be doing some parallel compression on the drums. I've done it in the studio before a million times. Just don't feel the need to have to jump through another hoop there with the drums. I don't have any problem making the drums sound exactly like the guy who's parallel compressing his drums by not parallel compressing my drums. That's just kind of where we are, man. We're just trying to keep it simple, keep everything straight ahead. I have 4 or 5 different M32 setups and one X32 setup. I'm trying to keep everything uniform across all of it so all my crew can step in, recall scenes, and they know it's going to be the same thing every time. That's why we're so consistent. And it's the same thing with low end, It's real easy to... Man, I know a guy here locally, one of my competitors, who's blown up more power amps and sub drivers than anybody I've ever met in my entire life. because he just doesn't understand the concept and the musicality of what we're trying to do. He's not a musician, so that's probably, not doing him any favors. I am at least a musician and spent years playing on a professional level before I got serious about doing pro audio. So I've been on both sides of the stage. I've been in both mindsets. I've been into the bass addiction mindset, and I'm now at almost 52 years old. I'll be 52 next month in October. I'm just finally now in a place where I'm like, I want things to feel more musical. You can still have that big impact. You can still feel the low end, but I just want to make sure that my low end isn't so loud or so impactful that it's robbing from the rest of the mix. And I see that mistake probably more than any other mistake that I run into in this business. There's been so many times where I've walked into a room and someone's been mixing and someone will recognize me or something and they'll be like, hey man, what would you do different in this mix? And probably 7.3 times out of 10, my response is, turn it down. I'd probably start there. Turn it down. It's too damn loud. My ears are hurting standing here. This is not enjoyable for me. I want to enjoy the band. And I carry earplugs with me everywhere because I have hearing loss and I'm trying to save what I got left. And I never go anywhere without earplugs. I'll put earplugs in and then I can somewhat enjoy the band at least, but I'm not enjoying the mix now because I've done cut 30 dB of the mix out. I'm losing all the fidelity now. That's a little bit of a buzzkill, but that's what I got to do to get through the night. I'm not going to let you destroy my ears because you don't understand basic gain structure. You don't understand the parameters of your room. You don't understand about mixing to the room, man, not mixing to your ego. And so many of you cats think that, you're validated by having the loudest, hardest hitting low end in town, and that makes you the best guy in town. Meanwhile, I'm just quietly over here mixing, 90 and 95 dB shows that are, framed in a manner to where people can actually enjoy the music and it's coming across in a musical way, in a dynamic, organic, living, breathing kind of way. Isn't that why we're doing this anyways? Sound reinforcement, not sound recreation. There's so many times I walk into a room and I hear a mix and it reminds me of like the three-legged dog I see running around my neighborhood. That dog is deformed, he's handicapped. The mix sounds the same way when there's way too much bottom end and you can't get the vocals or any of the mid-range stuff where it needs to be. Or because the bottom end is so loud, you can't even soften up that hurtful mid-range to make it more digestible because it's just way too much bottom end and you're fighting to get over the bottom end. In that process, you're sacrificing fidelity every single time. I can remember I was playing in a classic rock band and had hired a local guy to come out and mix us. And he did Soundcheck for the opening band. We had already done Soundcheck and he was doing Soundcheck for the opening band. And I think he was trying to impress me with the amount of volume his system could pump out. And we got about, 40% through Soundcheck. And I just kind of leaned over and I said, man, if you don't mind, and I'm not trying to be, the backseat driver here, but I am kind of writing a check. Could you just turn it down? Because it's too loud and it will sound better and more musical if you just turn it down some. And he kind of looked at me like he'd been shot at and missed. And I was like, I'm not being a jerk, dude, but that's harsh and painful. That's not what I want the audience to experience tonight. He turned it down probably 5 dBu on his final out, and dude, it cleaned right up. And then at the end of Soundcheck, he came to me and was like, you know what, dude, you were right. You were absolutely right. And I never try to be the I told you so guy because, look, man, I make a lot of mistakes. I'm still learning. I'm still trying to, put more tools in my toolbox too. So it's never about I told you so. It's just about, look, man, that guy didn't know me as a sound engineer. He knew me as a drummer in my band. But I wasn't about to throw all my credentials on the, on the table there to try to one up the guy and say, hey, I've been doing this longer than you, I have more experience than you, and I've mixed bigger shows than you. That's never how I want to come across, even though that was a fact. I just said, man, I just would rather hear, 95 dB, crystal clear, fat and warm, than 110 dB, harsh, painful, and pushing the people down the next block, because it was a big outdoor show. Always comes back to the simple stuff, guys. Always. I tell my guys all the time, it's always the simple stuff. If you're struggling with something, check all the basics. Always go back to your fundamentals. Always go back to the whole reason why any of us are here is because a band decided to get on a stage in front of a crowd too big to hear them play in their own natural state. So they had to bring something into that scenario that would reinforce what they're doing on stage to better communicate what they're doing to a bigger crowd. That means communicating their musicality in that process, not recreate it and twist it around and deform it into something else. Keep the integrity of the music in its proper place and just reinforce it. I know a lot of you guys like to say, it's just my job to make it louder. That is true, but I think that's an oversimplification, because I do feel like that there are sometimes we need to correct some things that are going on in the band, especially in the middle market, where we may have one person in the band that kind of struggles to sing correctly, or maybe they don't have the greatest guitar tone or something like that. And it just needs a little bit of pixie dust, or it needs a little bit of icing on the cake to be where it needs to be. That is our responsibility. That is our responsibility to make those things work in whatever environment we're thrown in. So that is important, but not to deform it into the three-legged dog running around my neighborhood. You know what I mean? Let's keep it what it's supposed to be. Imagine, what the Beatles thought when they were playing at, Giant Stadium or whatever in front of, 80,000 people. And they're like, we obviously got to reinforce this in a manner to where everybody can hear the band. Everybody paid good money to see us. So they have a legitimate concern, and they're focused on the audience experience. I did a video, I don't know, probably 6 months ago or so. If you guys dig through the archives, you'll find it, on focusing on the audience experience. I think that even cross-pollinated over into the client's experience. That might have been the name of the video, now that I'm thinking about it. Understanding what the client's experience is, But it's the same thing from the audience perspective. If you're an audience member, you don't want to sit there in pain for, in our case, 4 hours a lot of times. Most of our bands are playing 3 sets. You want to keep people in the room, and it's as much your responsibility as it is the band's to play the right songs that people want to hear. It's as much your responsibility to present that in a manner that doesn't make people want to leave. I was 5 years in a house gig with a system that was gigantic, and just turning it on was loud. The room was a big, wide open warehouse. It was a less is more kind of mixed room. And unless we had, 600-800 people in there, 1,000 people in there, we barely had the sound system on. And it was a constant struggle week after week after week not to run people out the back door because it was just loud. I mean, just to turn it on, we were at, 98, 95, 100 dB, mostly closer to 100 dB, 102 dB. That's loud, Now, I was really good at softening that mid-range and making it intelligible. I had a lot of pro touring buddies of mine that would always stop in when they were coming through town, and they would all say the same thing, like, your system is really loud, but it's not painful. That's when you're getting EQing right. That's when you're getting, the room dialed in correctly. You can still stand there and have a conversation with your buddy next to you. You may be talking in a loud manner, but you're not screaming at each other, and the system is 100 dB or 102 dB, but it's not hurting your ears. Sometimes you just got to work a room like that to figure all those things out. I was fortunate enough to have come from many years inside church production where it was all about, frequency carving everything, getting everything where it needs to be, without having to use volume to muscle your way through the mix. And I got really good at just kind of placing everything in its proper place and in the frequency bandwidth. And, you know, the kick doesn't get in the way of the bass guitar. That doesn't get in the way of, you know, the keyboard, which doesn't get in the way of the guitar. That doesn't get in the way of the vocals. Everything has its own little place in that 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz frequency bandwidth. When you figure out how to place the instruments in their proper place and then soften those mid frequencies at your mastering section in your console with compression and EQing and things like that, man, you can really get somewhere. You can really create something beautiful. Then you become one with the band at that point. At least that's how it always feels in my mind. Like when I'm mixing one of my favorite bands, this past weekend I got the ability to, or the privilege to mix Mallow Hill. I'm a big fan of those guys. They're a blues rock band out of Baltimore. Man, go look them up here on YouTube, and they will knock your socks off. Those guys are already coming to the table with a pretty polished product. I don't have to recreate anything with those guys. All I have to do is sprinkle the pixie dust on, put a little icing on the cake, mix it correctly for my system at this venue that we're at. In that case, we were outside, and I posted a bunch of video clips from those guys on the CLP Audio and Staging Facebook page. Go over there and listen to it. You can't hear the bottom end as much as I'd like you to because it's off a iPhone, but the mix is nice and clean. Even they had commented on one of the posts that it sounded like the record. They had just recorded that song in Nashville and was talking about how it sounded like the record. That makes me very, very proud, you know, because I work hard and I'm really trying to be musical from a sound engineer's, you know, perspective and not just be somebody who makes noise come out of the speakers. That's a noise engineer. And you can swing a dead cat in any major city in this country and find dozens of those guys. But the guys that actually take the time to be musical and take the time to, you know, get their systems dialed in correctly, understand the parameters of the environment that they're mixing in, those are the guys whose phones never stop ringing. And that's kind of where I'm at, because we're in September right now of 24, is trying to kill me. We just finished 2 weekends of festivals. Last weekend was a 3-day festival. We were out of town for 4 days, and then we're getting ready to spend another 3 days at Camden Yards with the Baltimore Orioles this weekend. I'm heading down to Inner Harbor tomorrow night to do a little corporate thing. I mean, it's nuts, man. It's nuts. And we're back in Baltimore all next weekend too, you know? So, yeah. If you're local, come see me, man. You know, come see me. And let's chat it up. Let's take a couple selfies. And let's have a good time. Trying to make the world a better place, one mix at a time, one show at a time. I'll see you next week.